Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where I have the opportunity to sit down and chat to amazing humans about their journeys and stories with mental health. For this episode, I'm so happy to introduce Guy Shahar to the conversation. Welcome, Guy.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. It's lovely to have you with us as well. So as I would always do, just a very brief introduction as to how we came about to this episode. And then I'll let you do a little bit of an introduction to yourself, let people know a little bit about what you do. That'd be great. And then we'll get into a conversation about the big stories and everything we want to cover in this episode as well. So Guy has been introduced to me through one of my colleagues, actually, who met with Guy and has had conversations with him. And it's been lovely to sort of get to hear an alternative perspective about Guy and his work and what he's doing, and now to obviously sit down with you and to have this conversation. So it's great to be here. I'm so happy, and we've had the chance to sit down and to record this episode. So Guy, I'll let you tell people a little bit more about what you do and who you are.
What I actually do two things. I run a charity called Transforming Autism, which is about, as you know, reframing autism and challenging conventional conceptions of what it is, and challenging the idea that it's an impairment and something bad, and putting forward an empowering perspective on it, but also working with very young autistic children at an age where, because autism comes with a lot of anxiety, not because of the autism itself, but because of the child not being understood and not being responded to in a way that makes them feel affirmed and makes them feel safe, actually. And it's about helping the child, but also equipping the parents with the tools to respond to their child in a way that builds these strong relationships. That's what we're about as a charity. I also am an energy healer, and I work in a business called Heartful Healing, where I help people. I help people to live to their true potential.
Amazing, and I'm sure we're going to delve in deeper into both of those elements, of course. The key point of these conversations, of course, is understanding a little bit about how you got to where you are and why you're so passionate about this. And, as everybody can probably understand, this is going to cover a lot around sort of autism and understanding more about autism, which for me, as a parent of somebody who is on the autistic spectrum, who was diagnosed at 17, I'm really intrigued and I'm really fascinating. And I just want to learn a bit more. And Guy, I'm going to throw that to you to start with. If you want to just tell us a little bit about that journey and sort of where you've been and where you are and why you got there.
I guess with the journey with autism, it sort of began, or the most obvious place to begin the story, at least, is with my son, who was born in 2009. When he was about one, actually, we noticed that he was struggling a little bit. He'd been a very happy baby. His development had been a bit slow, but apart from that, he'd been absolutely fine. But when he was one, he started forgetting the words that he'd learned. He started going backwards in many areas. He lost the ability to eat. He lost his independence in many ways, and he lost all communication with us slowly over a period of about 4 or 5 months. He went from being a really, really happy, connected, joyful child to being someone who sort of almost resented any attempt to communicate with him. And he was very distressed all the time. So he was having these really long meltdowns, and nothing could, he'd cry himself to sleep after several hours. He'd wake up screaming again. And we were just in a state, we just didn't have any idea what to do about this. And I won't go into our experiences with the medical services, but anybody who's been in this position will know that we don't need to go into details about that. It's clear. So we actually ended up opting out of the health service because it wasn't helping us at all, and just looking for something. And there's a lot of stuff out there which really doesn't seem very convincing, doesn't seem very helpful in any way. The one thing we found that did was a clinic in a village in the north of Israel, actually. And we actually ended up going there. We did an intensive 3-week program there, and a lot of work following on from that when we got home over a period of years. But essentially, the principles were about, similar principles to what our charity is based on now, which were to really understand the child, create an environment around the child where they feel safe and where strong relationships can be built. And you find that when you do that, so much else opens up. So many of the things that are considered difficulties for autistic children, and no longer difficulties, because they're not constantly being triggered by being misunderstood and just frustrated in everything that they want to communicate and they want to achieve.
Yeah.
So that was, that's my first time I ever became conscious of autism.
Yeah.
It eventually led to me writing a book about our journey and what had happened. I mean, the result of the work was that he is now a 13-year-old, very happy child. He still has, he's still autistic, so
Yeah.
he still has sensitivities. He still has a lot of anxieties, and those are a combination of the autistic mind, which thinks in a certain way. But that's not the cause of the difficulties. The difficulties are caused by anxiety, which have been caused by traumas that have accumulated at different times in his life, because we were able to create a great environment for him at home.
Yeah.
But the school environment was a different thing. I mean, he was doing so well, he ended up going to a mainstream school, and it was a bit overwhelming for him at first, but he had such a good attitude and he put everything into it, and he was really thriving there.
Yeah.
Until there was a big bullying incident, and it sort of just really knocked him back. And it was almost like, for a while, it seemed like all the progress that we'd made had just vanished. And it took a long time to get him transferred to an autism school where he's much happier there, and he's come out of himself a lot more, but he carries a lot of the anxiety from that time still. And that led to the formation of the book. It led to my TED talk called
Yeah.
The Beautiful Reality of Autism, and it led to the formation of the charity as well.
Wow. And I find it all really fascinating in terms of, taking where you've been on that journey and doing that TED talk. And I will link in your TED talk because I think it's a fascinating listen for anybody, for any parent as well, who is concerned about the development of their child at whatever age that could be as well. It's not just at those very young sort of 1 year age. It could be at any time you might start seeing some of those signs, right? I don't know how you feel, Guy, and I'm going to go into sort of my sort of, I don't want to go political, but I just want to give you my perspective, if that's okay, around, I think personally every child should be assessed on the autistic spectrum or around the diagnosis of potential autism at the earliest possible opportunities, so we can adapt and evolve our ways of working with them. That's my thoughts. I have a 20-year-old daughter, and at 17 she was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum with high functioning autism. She was what we saw on the outside doing really well with life.
Yeah.
She was head girl at school, she was doing well, but we never had any thoughts that she was on the autistic spectrum. And even when we were told the words, we thought, no, that can't be true because she's 17 now. No,
Yeah.
it's not possible. But then when we review everything and we go backwards and we look at her life and her journey, we could see the key markers of when things were changing. I don't know. I'm throwing that to you, Guy. I don't know what you want to do with it, but how do you feel about that in terms of sort of
Yeah,
everything?
I mean, you'll scare anybody in government who has to allocate funding, but
Yeah, but we've got to. We've got to
but it'd
tell
be a
the
great
truth.
thing to do.
Yeah.
Even better if the medical people could be aware and very conscious of the early signs of autism,
Yep.
which are there from the very earliest times of life. And if they're conscious of those and pick up on those at an early age, then the testing might not be necessary, because they would pick up on most of those children.
Mm.
And ultimately, of course, none of that would be necessary at all, because we'd have a society that was really respectful of the idea of neurodiversity, and then it wouldn't matter whether someone was autistic or had any other neurological type. They would be treated with, because there's no special treatment for autism. You
Right.
treat everybody with respect. You build a society that's based on mutual respect and value and love, effectively, and everybody thrives, whether they're autistic or not, whether they've got a different neurological type or not.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I think that's an aspirational thought, isn't it? We'd love to see this view of the world in the future, and it's challenging, isn't it? And one thing that I see a lot in the work that I do, and I don't really teach around neurodiversity, I do more around sort of the mental health world, and there's a direct correlation and connection to it. So let's not pretend it's sort of independent of each other. And you've said it, anxiety for your son, that's a real part of the mental health journey, and it is so important. But it's how do we help? This is a key, and I think with your charity, from what I see, this is a potential piece of what you are doing. But we're adults, right? We're adults who are now learning about mental health and neurodiversity, and actually a lot of us have never learned anything about it. And so we've lived a journey of our lives to wherever we are right now. And for anybody listening as well, you know, you are of a certain age and you've been through many experiences. How do we make people aware, or better awareness of what's really going on, and how we can make that, you know, vision of society a reality? How do we do that?
If I knew that, I'd be,
Yeah.
it'd be brilliant. But I mean,
Well, we're
you're doing
brainstorming.
it through this
Yeah.
sort of podcast, through the work that you do. I'm trying to do it through the charity as well, and
Yeah.
through my TED Talk and all of these sorts of things. I guess it's people who've been through whatever they've been through themselves, being willing to come on things like this and share their experiences. I think that's the best we could do at this point.
Yeah. You know what, I think that's so true, and I love, that's why I love this vehicle, to be able to get people to share their journeys, their experiences, you know, because the perspectives are really useful. You know, we can't just take one singular perspective of one person's life and go, that's the same for everybody, because it just isn't true.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big challenge, isn't it? So when we're talking about understanding mental health, you know, I feel very privileged because I sit and I listen to thousands of stories every year, but not everybody does that, and not everybody sees that.
Yes.
And I think that's what we have to continue to do, isn't it? The currency of the world today is built around people having the ability to tell their journey and their stories,
Yeah.
and be honest, you know. And I think that's half the battle with some of this. It's,
Mm.
you know, people don't want to accept that there's anything wrong, you know. Conversations, I don't know how your conversations in your household go, but, you know, conversations about normal lives and having a normal family. And, you know, this is a conversation I've had with my youngest daughter, and she really craves a normal family. And you go, well, okay, so talk to me.
Yeah.
Draw me the picture of a normal family. Tell
Yeah.
me exactly how that functions. Tell me what anxiety, how they manage their anxiety. How do they, I don't know, what's your view of normality or normal? Is there anything?
For me, I mean, no, no. I mean, it's almost like if usually there's something behind that. If somebody's saying that I want a normal life, what's behind it? You know, it's almost like exploring what is it in this life that you're not happy with, that you think would be solved by having this elusive thing called a normal life. And that would probably be a more useful question, a more productive question.
Yeah.
I don't know, because it doesn't sound that attractive to me to live a normal life. What
I love that. No, not to me either.
there's nothing, you know,
No.
there's nothing attractive of being normal unless you're unhappy with something that's there at the moment. And it's possible to be unhappy with what's there at the moment without thinking that there's this magical thing called a normal life that will solve it. Because what like you say, what is a normal life? And if you think in a way that's informed by neurodiversity, it doesn't even make sense to talk about a normal life, because there isn't a norm. There's just lots of different people who are doing their best to make their way through this life.
Yeah, and it is so true, and it does make it, you know, the big challenge is we're all unique, and we're all in a different way of seeing and interpreting the world around us. And I know in your TEDx talk you show a video that's really sort of insightful around the sort of the stimulation in a shopping center, you know, for a young person on the autistic spectrum. Now, of course, it's not necessarily the same for everybody, but there's a lot of, you know, things that people wouldn't even realize, you know, that are going on inside the head or the mind or the brain or the experience that individuals are going through. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your version of that? How that would, you know, from your son's perspective, or from your own perspective, or however you want to present that?
Of what
Just about the stimulation and the oversensory issues.
Yes, I'm not. I don't like talking about overstimulation,
Okay.
Or being oversensitive.
Yeah.
Because you know, there's a judgment there in that sort of language. Why don't we talk about non-autistic people having blunted senses, for example?
Okay.
You know, why, you know, if everybody was hard of hearing, you'd have a world where everything was booming out, and anybody with normal hearing would be deaf. Who's to say, again, it's back to this normal thing, who's to say where normal goes? Who's to say that it's not the autistic person who's normal and everybody else that has to blast everything out at really loud volume? Just for example, it's just that perspective. So, and what's the advantage of having heightened senses? It's that you've got more perception. It's got you can perceive things that other people can't see. And that's not only on the level of what we think of as the 5 physical senses. I feel it's very much on an emotional level as well. and very much on a perceptual level. So the physical senses are one thing, and they can be, depending on people's level of sensitivity combined with the environment around them, that can be a real issue.
Yeah.
But for many autistic people, an even bigger issue is the sensitivity on the emotional level, and that ability to perceive other people's emotions. Just to perceive it on its own is huge, because there's no science behind this as far as I know, but I have a sense that a lot of autistic people are also empathic, in the sense of actually tuning into and experiencing other people's emotions as if they're their own. I've had this through my life, that I've had an enormous change in my emotional condition. I have no idea why, and it took me decades to work out that it's due to the people around me. Because it's not like I think, oh, it's that person who's feeling this. It's not like that. It's like something happens in me, and I don't know where it comes from. So there's that side of it as well. Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting. Well, I love that perspective and understanding, and I think thank you for bringing that to my to my this conversation, because I don't understand it as much, and I've said that to you very clearly. We had a diagnosis at 17, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around what that means and how that works. And I think there's a whole host of things that I just don't understand about it. So, I think that's so important. And that thing about the empath, we talk a lot in the mental health world of, the best conversations are just connecting with empathy, and imagining sort of this world where empathy is a wonderful, powerful gift that people have. But obviously it can sometimes come with its own challenges if you're really taking on all those negative feelings.
Yeah, well, when people talk about how great empathy is, it's almost like, it's great. They're thinking it's great if you've got full control over it.
Yeah,
you can be empathic when you want to, but if you're empathic, it's there all the time, whether you want it or not. You want a quiet day, you don't get it because you're influenced by everyone you come into contact with.
Yeah, and you know what, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of my daughter, and I'm thinking about the journey she's on, and how in the environment she's in, and I talk very openly about her journey, and the fact she's been in hospital for so long. It's just, she is surrounded by emotions all day long, every day, and not just her own. She struggles with her own, but she's surrounded by the other people that are in the facilities that she's living in at the moment. And I can't even comprehend how that must feel for her, to be honest with you.
Yes.
That's actually, I find that really quite surprising. But not that, well, I'm not surprised, but I'm surprised thinking about it now, and considering that as a big part of what she's going through right now. So
it's impactful.
Yeah, definitely. It's opened my eyes. Thank you, Guy. So you've stopped me in my tracks for a moment there, because but that's not a bad thing, by the way, and that's more because I'm reflecting now on the reality of what's going on with my daughter, and like I say, I don't have all the understanding and education awareness around it, and I guess, how do you work with families? How do you work with families through the charity that you've set up? Because I know obviously there's a lot of focus and emphasis on the person that has a diagnosis or potential diagnosis, but there's obviously the community, the family, and I want to support my daughter as best as I can, like you did with your son. How do I do that, or what would you work with, and how would you work with a family?
So it's the work is very family based. So it's very, very much about it's as much about the family as the child, because otherwise it's like there's the implication that it's the child who's got the problem because the child is autistic, and that's not how it is. It's a problem of communication between the two. So what we do is we work with very, very young children, or families with very, very young autistic children up to the age of 4, so 3 or below. And basically it's a multidisciplinary service that we do. We send a child psychotherapist and an occupational therapist to the family home. Occasionally they visit together. Usually they visit separately, but they work very closely behind the scenes to make sure that they're working in tandem to develop the child's to help the child with their development, and also to help the family with their ability to understand the child, to understand what the child needs, what the child's communication is trying to indicate, and to respond in ways that make the child feel, God, I'm understood here. This person understands me. I can trust them, and it just develops really strong bonds of understanding within the family. And it can really transform a child from being someone who's constantly anxious, constantly melting down because everything seems unmanageable, to a child that has a level of strength, of confidence and of trust. So that, you know, I always think of it as you sort of free the child up so that they can use their resources to focus on their own natural development in their own way, rather than spending all of their resources dealing with frustration and accumulating trauma that's going to knock them back in the future.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And I think that's such a wonderful way and approach to do it. And, you know, if only we'd have had those tools early, that would have been, you know, a wonderful thing for us to be able to adapt and to work with our daughter. And, you know, and I'm sure there are many families out there and people listening to this as well who just wish that was, you know, something that was embedded early. And it's so difficult. How far and wide do you reach with your charity? Do you have a specific geographical location? Do you go?
We're at the very early stages. It's a fairly new charity. We've just launched our first set of services. We wanted to do it properly, so we've had it. You know, we've had the actual service created for us by Norland College, which is an early years specialist institution. So it's, you know, it's got a framework, and, you know, it's a very you know, credible service now. We're actually working only in two areas to begin with. One is Colchester, and one is Oxford, and the areas around those. So there'll be parts of Buckinghamshire, you know, parts of Suffolk that we can reach as well.
Amazing. Aspirations for it? What would you like to do with it?
Aspirations are that we'd like to make it nationwide. Eventually, it'll take time, but to get to it to be nationwide. Our ultimate aspiration is that we want to, you know, I mentioned the centre that we went to in Israel. We'd like to bring our own version of that centre to the UK. Wow. You know, we've talked with the centre in Israel. They're fully behind this. It's just that we need to grow as a charity to the size and scale to be able to do that.
Yeah, and that's going to take a lot of effort and energy and some of that money stuff, I guess, as well, right? So it's all driven by the money. But you know, it sounds absolutely fascinating, and I think there is a you know, I see it talking to other family members, you know, to other families, not just my own family, but, you know, talking to other people out there, other parents. There's such a reality right now of challenges for young people, you know, and at all ages, you know, so all of the children. And you look at the mental health statistics, and, you know, there's some really scary stuff going on out there. You know, most mental illnesses will develop before the age of 14, you know, and what's it, the numbers, three quarters of all mental illness develops in childhood, you know, so up into adolescence as well. But it's a scary reality as well, then overlaying things like neurodiversity. You know, I still think there is a huge connection point that's being missed by a lot of people. I don't know how you feel about that. You know, do you feel that similar?
A connection point
between mental health and or mental illness and neurodiversity, and in the way that you'll see it, because you mentioned anxiety with your son. You know, I see that with my daughter, I see that with other children.
So the way I think about it is that you know, I sort of mentioning this a bit before with autism, and, you know, I'm not, I don't have any expertise in a lot of other conditions, but I think of this as quite a universal thing, although I might be wrong. That certainly with autism, anxiety is not an inherent part of autism. You know, people think of, you know, autistic people, autism equals anxiety. It doesn't. The anxiety doesn't come from autism. The anxiety comes from the autistic person being misunderstood and responded to in ways that frustrate them, that make them feel unheard, make them feel unvalued. And, you know, I don't think you'll find an autistic adult anywhere that you can interview that hasn't been through a lifetime of being misunderstood, and it's probably still happening to them. So there's that accumulated trauma. That's the anxiety. It's not nothing to do with autism. In the same way as somebody who's not autistic, if they went to an environment where they were feeling constantly misunderstood, constantly devalued, constantly unheard, whether constant aggression towards them in certain situations, they would end up as extremely anxious as well. It's not autism that leads to anxiety. Non-autistic people, most of them tend not to have that experience, although anxiety is growing in lots of other groups as well. Because the way that the world is structured, is in there, it is comfortable for them. You know,
Yeah.
it's the non-autistic type that has created the world and the culture around.
Mm.
So although there is a lot of anxiety and there are a lot of people who are devalued because of who they are,
Yeah.
but you know, there is a group which you would call the norm, not because they are normal, but because they are dominant, who the world is set up for. So they're not going to feel that anxiety, but they would if they were in a different type of situation.
Yeah, incredible. I'm fascinated listening to you because I think you know, we don't necessarily see things exactly the same, which is perfect, by the way, because we should never see things exactly the same. That's the beauty of life. And I just feel so much more aware because of the conversation, this conversation, if that makes sense. And I genuinely, I'm so thankful for this conversation, by the way, Guy. I really am, because I didn't know where we were going to go with it, and I didn't know what we were going to cover, but
Neither did I.
I'll tell you what, that's sometimes the beautiful thing of life, right? We just have to ride with it and see where we head. And I think what you're sharing and saying is so true. And again, it's just opening my eyes and enlightening me around, you know, the fact that the world is set up for, you know, the majority of people who we think it's set up for, and we don't always contemplate and think about the alternatives and how other people might experience that journey of life. So it's incredible, honestly. We've got a few more minutes, and I do just want to make sure we sort of cover off in terms of heartful healing as well, and sort of linking into that, because I know that's obviously your day job. You've got the charity, which I'm sure just takes up a lot of your time and energy as well. But heartful healing, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing with your day job, with the other piece?
Yeah, it's energy healing. So it sounds a bit weird for people who haven't come across anything like this before.
Yep.
But essentially, people come to me with whatever issue they have. It might be a mental health issue. It might be something totally different. It might be physical pain. It might be a relationship issue. It might be sort of a habit that they can't change or something like that. It might be they're stuck in some area of their life. It might be a lack of confidence. It doesn't matter what it is, in a sense. I work with it in the same way, in that I make this is the part that seems weird for people, but you know, if you can accept this part, at least it'll make sense. I make an unconscious I make a connection with their subconscious mind, and through that I'm able to ask it yes or no questions, and I will use those to understand what are the imbalances in their body, what are the energetic blocks in their system, and often it's repressed emotions and things like this, which are stopping them from having the sort of life that they want to have. So we could focus it, you know, if they've got pain in their neck, it's like, what imbalances are contributing to this pain in the neck? What do we need to release in order for that neck to feel better? And we go through it systematically, and with any luck, their life changes. And with physical pain, actually, it's a really good one, because I'd say in 60 to 80% of cases, you get a significant reduction in the pain during the first working session itself. You sort of you see the reduction by the end. Sometimes it's more complicated. Where it tends not to work is where there's great physical degeneration. It's like I've had a few elderly women with knee issues, where the muscles all degenerated, the bones are scraping, and there's not a lot you can do then, because the actual physical matter is destroyed almost. But you know, where there's still that capacity for the body to recover, and the body has an enormous capacity to heal itself, that's where we can, because all we're doing is removing the blocks to let the body heal itself. That's it.
Wow. I think that sounds fascinating. I've never really sort of, again, it's another thing I'd never really considered or looked into, you know, and so incredible. So I will drop the links into your workings around sort of I can't say the word, sorry, it's
Heartful
not intentional.
healing.
Heartful healing, yeah, it's too many H's in there.
Heartfulhealing.co.uk. It's easy.
There we go. So I'll put that in the description to this episode as well for everybody out there. But it's incredible the stuff you're doing, Guy. I really do appreciate everything about you and your journey and your stories, and you know, the TEDx that you've delivered, which again I'll share that with everybody. But as I always do with this, I always like to leave, you know, with some final thoughts from you, you know,
Oh gosh.
about what you want. Don't worry, just go with whatever you feel comes naturally. But any thoughts, you know, just throwing out there any messages to people about, you know, the journey of autism, or the whatever you want to share. So I'll leave that with you just for a moment.
I'm afraid I'm gonna have to pass on that. I'm not very
All
good
right.
at
Final thoughts. Yeah. Impromptu final thoughts. A favorite quote, Guy? Have you got a favorite quote that you like to live life by, or a mantra of life, or a philosophy of life? No.
Sorry.
That's all right. Don't worry. It's all good. Don't worry. It's all good. But I think what's wonderful is just your understanding and awareness and your perspective. I genuinely, I've said that many times in this conversation, but I do believe, everybody's perspective is so valuable. And for anybody that is listening out there, you know, learn more about the work that Guy's doing, learn more about the organization, the charity, albeit it might not be reaching everybody nationwide at the moment. I'm sure there's learnings that everybody can take from some of that. Just I know a lot of parents out there today struggling with supporting their children for many different reasons, and that's not just about the fact that they might be struggling with some of their developmental needs, but I think it's inherent upon us all as parents to learn. I think that is important. Our journeys with whether it's mental health, neurodiversity, or the connection of both together, and all the other wonderful things. It's important that we all do our journey of learning, and continue to do that. Which today has been a huge lesson for me. So thank you, Guy.
Thank you, Matt. It's
Really,
been
really
fun.
appreciate it. It's been very fun and emotional. I had to hold it for a moment, and it
Oh,
was and it's not something that I'm ashamed of or worried about or feel vulnerable to, but it was just I could feel something, especially when I was considering like my daughter's journey, and I think that's so thank you.
welcome. Thank
Thank
you.
you for that. So there we go. So we are finished for this episode. I just want to wish you all the very best, Guy, with everything that you're doing. You're doing amazing work, as I've already said. You're an amazing human. I wish you, your family, your son, all the very best on your journeys as well. And for anybody listening, if anybody does want to reach out, you'll have Guy's contact details. Please feel free to do so. If anybody want to reach into me, feel free to do that as well. That's what this is all about. It's about accessibility and making sure people know there's always somebody there. We should never live through these challenges on our own. We should always have the right support around us. So thank you so much, Guy. It's been an absolute pleasure. I wish you all the best. Yeah.